Um, so when I was little, I would always see my spirit guides. I didn't know what they were. I just would see people as if I would, see you. And they would always comfort me. But this one particular night, I was in the midst of a conversation with my spirit guides, and all of a sudden there were snakes everywhere in my dream.
Hello, family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name's Betty, and today I'm joined by Sarah. And Sarah is a professional artist, and she's a lifelong mystic. And I'm super excited for your willingness to come on and serve our community. This is actually Sarah's first time sharing about all of her mystical experiences. So, welcome to coming out of the spiritual closet, girl. I can't
Thank
wait to hear
you.
what comes up today. I'm going to toss it
Thank
right
you.
over to you. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, I kind of knew this day was coming. I was going to come tell my story, but just to know when. But this is definitely the moment. So I was to preface everything. I was born in Belarus during the Soviet Union to a Jewish family. We escaped Soviet Union when I was about 3.5, and traveled through refugee camps, through Austria, Italy. Stayed with it was a crazy, like, it was 1989, so people don't even realize this was like happening during this time, that people were still, there was refugees coming out of the Soviet Union. um, it was against the religion, or against the law, to even practice any religion. So my family, even though I knew I was Jewish, my bloodline was Jewish, but we didn't practice anything at that point. So I came from a pretty agnostic household. Nobody really forced me. I went to Saturday school for a few years, and it all sounded like bullshit to me. So I quit. But before then, so my first mystical experience, I was still in Belarus. I was 2 years old. There's witnesses, there's family members that were there, my mom, dad, sister, grandmother. Um, so when I was little, I would always see my spirit guides. I didn't know what they were. I just would see people as if I would, see you. And they would always comfort me. But this one particular night, I was in the midst of a conversation with my spirit guides, and all of a sudden there were snakes everywhere in my dream. And there were like, I mean, like, it was like piles of, I don't know if you've seen The Craft, but once I saw that movie, when uh, that scene where Sarah, which is funny that her name is Sarah, was walking through her house. There were snakes everywhere, and just piling onto each other. And I woke up from my nightmare, but the snakes were still there, everywhere, in my crib, on the floor. Um, I started speaking pretty early, so I had a pretty big vocabulary at that point. But I had never seen a snake in real life at that. I was 2, so this was clearly something that was not from this world. I was screaming. There were snakes. My mom was telling me there wasn't. She kept changing my sheets to pacify me, which kind of made it worse, because in my head she was also seeing the snakes. And I remember in my vision there was my one of my spirit guides, who was an older woman, probably an older version of me in an alternate universe, like older woman, like in 80s, 90s. And she was trying to comfort me telepathically. And I remember behind her was a giant anaconda, and I was trying to tell her and scream to her that there's a snake behind you, but she just kept smiling at me. And then, like, she was devoured, and that's horrifying for a 2-year-old. And the only time it stopped, finally, my dad took his shirt off, and they put me. I had a fever about 105 at that point, because, and it was only, it lasted that for those couple hours, and that was it. So my dad took his shirt off, and got on his chest, and the snakes and the visions disappeared. And it I can recall it as if it happened today. Like, it's at my it was the same. It was like as if, it was at me then, but when I was little. But now, um so for years that haunted me. That I didn't understand it. It was scary. I thought, it was like an evil entity. I couldn't understand it. And then I always, like, was able to see spirits, feel things. I would always have like a knowing. I Since I was little, I just knew where we were from. I knew that we weren't from here. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that people only thought I was, 5 years old, because my soul was so much older than that, and were treating me like a child. So, and then my near-death experience happened about 5th grade. So I was about between 9 and 10 years old. I was on climbing. It was in school. I was wintertime in Minnesota, and I was climbing up the monkey bars. I had full mittens and a jacket on, so I was completely covered. Should not have been climbing anything at that point. I stood on top of the monkey bars in my snow pants and my winter boots, and I slipped, and I fell about 30 feet straight onto my chest. I actually got up immediately, but realized that my lungs had completely compressed. And I remember thinking, I can't breathe. I'm going to die. And I could not, my lungs would just not, decompress. And I remember thinking I'm dying, and I fell to the ground, and immediately I was about, 200 feet above my body. And I just was very peaceful. Wasn't scared at all. I just remember like being like, yeah, this is right. And I remember the very first thought was I wanted to look at myself and wanted to see like wherever, because there was a group of people kind of forming around me because I'm just laying there in the middle of the playground, and I zoom right into my face, and so I can like right there. And then my first thought is I want to go home. Like I just, but instead of going anywhere else, I was outside of my bedroom window at my house, like 20 miles away. And excuse me. And I was, from what I remember at that time, I was immediately then sucked back into my body, and I woke up. I didn't even like process it until a few years later what happened to me, because it just, everything just seemed so normal at the time. Like, yeah, like I'm able to pop out of my body, that's totally normal. Because at that point I already have been having mystical experiences. I've been able to like astral project, and when I was like in bed, so it didn't seem weird, but I didn't realize like the gravity of what happened. And so weird things still were happening. It was scary. And then around like 12, 13, I realized I had this premonition that I was going to have a very difficult life. And around 30, it was going to start kind of turning around. And I didn't know why I knew that, but I just knew I was going to. And yeah, I mean, I can continue, or if you want to ask anything from there.
You can keep going.
Okay. So from about 15 to 30, I completely numbed myself out. I could not handle, it was like, if people always wonder what it would be like if we were born into this world remembering and not having this fail. It's actually very difficult because I could not um, assimilate to human life. I was always in my head. I completely, the other side of being able to leave your body is I could dissociate any second. So I was either dissociating. I couldn't be around a lot of people because I wasn't able to. My ego and my spirit and my higher self were not integrated anyway at this point. Um, so it was really difficult for me. I always felt like the weirdo. I was also an immigrant child, first generation growing up in Minnesota of all places. I didn't look like anybody else. I didn't fit in. I always felt little like I just kind of like knew things that people didn't know, and I didn't understand why I knew these things. So I was just, I started taking like drugs pretty early on. From about 14 on, my mom always kind of had a pharmacy in her bathroom, and I'd go in there and I'd numb myself out. And that kind of lasted for almost 20 years. But the problem is I always had a limit, and I knew that I didn't want to check out. I was just trying to put like a soft barrier around me so I could like function in the world. So it was almost worse than kind of having a really bad drug habit for a couple of years and hitting rock bottom. Mine was manageable, so much so that it lasted so much longer, and it prevented me from growing and evolving. So that lasted a long time. And in the meantime, I was able to, since I was little, I always understood manifestation. Since I was a child, I understood what it meant to co-create my reality. So anything I ever really wanted, I was always able to obtain. So I became a professional artist about 6 years ago, and somehow that, even in the midst of still trying to numb myself out, I was able to somewhat have some success in my life. I have a family. I have 3 children and a husband, and it's been really interesting having kind of doing what I thought, like, even though I'm such a free spirit, I know that I'm such an autonomous person. I always wanted to have a family, but at the same time, it was really difficult to function. I don't think I was very aware of being present for my children, but inside, I kind of always just wanted to die. And not because I hated life. I think life is so beautiful, and um, I think there's so many gifts, and there's things that you can't do unless you are incarnated, and I know that, and I think that's amazing. But there's a lot of times where this body is so heavy, and I just kind of want to. I'm just kind of, well, if something were to happen, that's okay, because I know what happens, so I'm not scared. But so up until it happened about a year ago, where my grandmother, my mom's mom, my mom had passed away about 10 years ago, and it was a terrible, awful death. Uh, really quick to rewind. And so I was numbing out for a long time. And then 2012 happened, which I think for a lot of people who are already kind of on the spiritual path, 2012 was a pretty pivotal year for a lot of people, where my life completely fell apart. I was married, and to the father of my daughter, who I had known for about 6 months, and we had gotten divorced after she was a year old. My mom had gotten stage 4 cancer. My dad left us, not just my mom, but the whole family, after 32 years of marriage, because my mom was sick and he couldn't handle it. All of this happened in 2012. So I had a complete nervous breakdown. So I started going back into my spiritual side, but it's still not 100%. I'm still numbing. So I'm not letting myself fully feel. I'm kind of escaping into spirituality at this point. So for the next almost 10 years, I'm escaping into spirituality. I can meditate for hours on end. I'm having a really difficult time integrating into family life, into the world, and I'm white knuckling it. And I don't think anyone on the outside would probably be able to tell. I was able to mask it pretty well, but it was difficult. And then a year ago, my grandmother, who I'm very close to, she was not living in the same state as I was at that time, and I had found out that she was in the hospital. And I was meditating that evening, and she came to me, and she said, "I'm not sick, I'm dying, you need to get here." And I was like, oh my God. So I flew over there, and she had not recognized anybody for a week at that point, but she knew I was coming. She recognized me. We spoke. I was there when she took her last breath. It was the most beautiful gift anyone could ever given me, because I had so much guilt from my mom passing away, and I was her sole caregiver, and it was just so much that I was able to heal all of that with my grandmother's passing. And it was just the two of us in the room, and it was so special. And because of that, the experience of her coming to me into when I was meditating, that connection we had and how real it was, even my atheist husband couldn't deny how crazy it was. So a year ago, everything started changing for me. I realized that spiritual bypassing is a real thing, and unless there's no point of growing yourself spiritually or evolving if it's not going to make your life on earth better. I think a lot of people want to escape this human, human the world on earth, and just kind of bypass that and just go into 5D and be a spirit. But what's the point then? So last year I started integrating my ego with my higher self, and that changed everything. Once your ego realizes that it's actually beneficial for it to do things that are good for you, and actually it kind of stops trying to self-sabotage you, because I was the queen of self-sabotage, and that's when I stopped numbing myself. That's when I completely changed timelines. like, I know that for a fact. Things are not like, even in my household, things are slightly different because I completely changed my life. And so now I have this calling to help people kind of integrate their ego with their higher self. And I think shadow work is so important, and facing your demons. And because all of that, all of my the experience when I was 2 years old with the snakes all started to make sense. And yes, it was scary because I was a little child and it was scary for me, but the snake, the serpent, represents dark feminine power. It represents wisdom. It represents life, death, the cycle. And when that giant anaconda was behind my spirit guide, that old little lady spirit guide, it was the representation was like the giant wisdom. And I knew that I was going to have to walk through darkness, and I am no longer afraid of it. And I think a lot of people, especially in the spiritual community now, there's fear of looking into your own darkness, and not just looking at it, but accepting it and loving it as a part of you, and being okay with it, because I think a lot of suffering comes from the resistance of it. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I did a lot of talking. I hope that's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I got a lot out of what you're talking about.
Oh,
Some
great.
some things came up. Well, number one, I just want the audience to be clear because sometimes they don't necessarily know what it is that we're talking about. So let's just talk like we're talking like on a
Right.
kindergarten sort of level. Can you explain what spiritual bypassing is?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Spiritual bypassing is when you it's like any kind of anything can be an escape, right? So can drugs can be an escape. Like when you don't want to deal with your real life, you then spiritual bypassing would be completely escaping your real life, not working on your own shit and your own shadows, your own demons, and just only focusing on the light. So that means everything else around you falls apart. So it's really easy to be an enlightened, positive spiritual person when you're sitting alone in a cave or in your room, and you don't have to deal with the outside world. So that's what spiritual bypassing is.
Thank you. That's a great explanation of that. I really
Yeah.
like that. Thank you. And can you explain what shadow work is?
Yes. It's not just a spiritual term, it's a psychological term. Carl Jung coined it. It's basically looking at your subconscious. We 90% of our actions and our experiences are based off I'm sorry, not experiences, but our actions and why we do things is based off our subconscious. And a lot of it is things we have. Obviously, if it's in the dark, we have no idea why we're doing it. So shadow work is having a conversation with your subconscious, and it's literally facing your demons.
Thank you for that. So if somebody wanted to, or what would be the purpose of somebody kind of going into shadow work? Like what kind of people should do this? Should everyone do
Well,
it?
absolutely. I think everyone. I don't think you can escape life without some sort of trauma. I think some people have more trauma than others, but there is always there's if you're doing something that is not benefiting you, and it's like this subconscious behavior. Like, I'm going to use addiction for an example. So if you're addicted to drugs and you're just doing it, and sure, you can get off it, you can go to rehab, but if you don't find the root cause and you don't find that shadow of why you even started to want to escape, then you're going to continue having, like, even if somebody is a very spiritual person and they don't work on their shadow, your thoughts and your what you channel from your spirituality is going to be filtered through a very distorted filter, because you're not seeing, you're seeing it through your demons. Basically, that's when, like, cults and cult leaders are formed, because yes, they may be spiritual, and at one point they they were hearing, connected to divine, but they're filtering it through their shadow, through their misguided beliefs, through their narcissism. So I think everyone should work on shadow work and their subconscious.
Yeah, that's really helpful too. I often want to like yell at people, like, you need to do your shadow work, like roll
Right.
my eyes, like, you really
Uh,
need help. I'll pray for you. But
exactly.
I think that it's really amazing that this is your first time sharing about your experience and kind of an open space, and you're so eloquent in talking about it. And what are some of the things that you felt really sort of pulled you to come out and share? Because I think that there's a lot of people in our community that listen and watch videos like this, and they've had their own mystical experiences and they're too scared to come out and share about it. What gave you the courage to do this finally?
Um, I think, well, when you have like this drive inside of you, and especially this last year, I think I probably would have stayed in the closet for the rest of my life if the what happened with my grandmother didn't happen last year. And I kind of it almost like made me realize like, oh, I have to, if I'm going to be spiritual, I should, it should help my life and not not just like, think, like I guess we can all like understand oneness and unity and the light, but like what's the point if we're not, living and enjoying our life? So I think my drive right now is seeing, especially the community, like the spiritual community, there's so many people waking up, and they're at like on the, like I think there's so many different awakenings. It's not just like you wake up and all of a sudden everything. Like I'm on my like my third, fourth awakening, so people who are just waking up and realizing, oh, we are all one, we're all, and they all of a sudden find like a spiritual teacher, and they assume just because this person's knowledgeable in spirituality and may even have psychic abilities or whatever it is, does not mean that they know everything, does not mean they've worked on their own shadow stuff. So I think I really want to come across, like I want people to understand discernment, and because there's so many people waking up, and I think maybe I woke up, I this is, it's my turn now to like help the people waking up, and that's kind of been my drive. And like all of a sudden it's like this pull just to share, and like I don't think I'll feel better until I do.
Wow, I love that. And I think that courage is a muscle, just like anything else.
Oh,
All of these
absolutely.
spiritual muscles that we're constantly practicing. So to get the courage to come out and share about, who you truly are is incredible. So thank you for it. I'm wondering, I heard
Yeah, thank
you
you.
slightly mention that your husband is an atheist. So I'm wondering,
Yes.
what's your family life like as a spiritual
It's
person who's been in awareness forever?
it's funny. I have children. My son, I have a 2.5-year-old baby who sees stuff all the time. He has conversations, and he's definitely very similar. It's so funny, like when you have children, you're like literally healing that part of you. And it's funny that I have a 2-year-old now, which is, I'm like, I've been like healing my 2-year-old self from that snake trauma. So it's funny how like that child is very in tune. But I have a daughter who is a Capricorn. I'm a Cancer, and she's a Capricorn, which is my opposite. And she is very grounded in rational thought, very earthly right now. So when I talk about this stuff, she checks out. um, so I don't push it. I think everyone's, I don't say anything unless she comes to me. So I think everyone's on their journey. And I think I'm here because at some point they will need their guidance. I also have my niece who we adopted, who's going to be 17 soon. And she's had a lot of trauma. So uh, she's having a, issue in faith right now. So I think I'm the perfect person to be that support when they need me. But and my husband's he went to Catholic, he was forced to go to Catholic school as a kid, and he just now just hates anything to do with that. But he can't help, like I have premonitions and I say things, he can't help but be like, okay, that's weird. Like I know that, like I'm kind of like, I've always, even my sisters always said, I'm placed in places to push people out of their comfort zones. Like my family, like my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, so she never even, she couldn't really connect with people, and I was the only person she was affectionate with, and I make everyone uncomfortable in the best way, you know.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And it's amazing to be able to reframe it in this super positive, uplifting way. Because somebody else could look at that situation and call it something else. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about coming into spiritual awareness is that our eyes are opened to this actual perception of
Absolutely.
reality. And I love that. Can you talk a little bit maybe about, I know that we've talked about premonitions and this shared death experience that you had with your grandmother. Do you have any sort of after death communication with your loved ones that have crossed over?
Oh, I feel them all the time. I have instead of seeing, I when I'm really stressed out, I have Clairaudience. Like I can hear music. Like I remember my mom was passing away, so there was a lot of activity, and she was hospice in my apartment. So I had like a two-bedroom apartment. My mom was in one room, and during hospice, and I was in the other, completely just a mess. So I wasn't getting enough sleep. So I would constantly hear choirs singing, like full albums. I remember it was over. I'm like, oh, sad it's done. But I would I would just have these knowings. That's kind of my main gift, is just knowing. And so now I feel my grandmother around me all the time. And my mom had a very long, horrible like suffering before she passed. So I know that she didn't stick around in the fourth dimension too long. Um, she came to me for the first couple of days. She would ring the doorbell all the time, freak me out. I'm like, Mom, okay, I get it. Please stop. I know you're here. She would, she would do anything to get my attention because I would tell her, and she always thought I was kind of a little out there too. So I remember her like telling her, like, when you go, like, make sure to like give me signs. So, yeah, I can feel. I remember when I was little, like actually physically feeling my spirit guides. Like I had one like kind of over me, and I would grab his arm. Um, but yeah, it's just I thought everyone was like that my whole life. So apparently not. But my son is like that, so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
I have a couple of small children in my life, like friends' kids, my
Yeah.
cousins' kids, and I'm always berating them. I'm like, tell me where you came from. What do you remember?
They're
And
like,
they're like,
what are you
oh,
talking about?
mommy's belly. I'm like, that's not right. But I think
Remember.
that's I think that that's so cool. And I'm always really interested to hear about people and how they like consciously parent when they are in awareness and they have children, because that's a very human
It's
experience raising a
and it's
human being.
hard. It's taking me, like, I'm going to be 40 next year, so it's taking me a while. And my kid is, my daughter is 13, so it's taking me like a long time to even get to this point where I don't want to just go sit in a cave somewhere, because I really do, like, I like, sometimes I'll just drive out into the middle of the desert and camp in my car for 2 days because I just need to um recharge. So I think having that balance is super important. If I had just thrown myself into normal life and never have anything for myself, I don't think I would be okay. But I just really wanted to, because I think the relationships around you and how you interact with people, it doesn't matter who, is a direct reflection on who you are. So if you're, you know, claiming to be like this spiritual aware person and out of non-duality, but you can't get along with anybody, including like your family or even just strangers, and that says more about you, which goes back to the whole shadow work. But so I really thought it was important for my life, just because I was either going to check out or I was going to make my family life work. And I really, like, I want to, I want to enjoy my life, and I want my kids to be happy around me. And I want to be happy around my kids. And even as an artist, that's hard enough to be a parent as an artist, because you kind of just escape into your own mind. But having that outlet is really important. I think people need to have that balance.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. Something came up for me while you were talking, and while you were sharing, you mentioned the idea that a lot of people are waking up to the awareness that we're all one. And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering if maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, no doubt there's a shift happening, and people have been calling it um, the apocalypse or whatever it is, but it's really not. It started happening. There was like a wave in 2012. I think a lot of people woke up, and now it's just, I mean, just going on YouTube, you see how many more podcasts there are just sharing their people's spiritual experiences. And I think people are waking up, not just for the oneness, but people are waking up and realizing that how we are co-creating our reality, and how powerful and divine we are, and we are so much more than our bodies, and that we really do create our own reality. And it's far beyond just like the book The Secret. It's like, advanced, you know people are really getting it. And I don't think Like, even like I remember trying to read quantum physics 15 years ago, and I could not wrap my mind around it. And now I'm like watching all these like podcasts and reading all these books, and I totally get it. And I think it's, you're when you start waking up, your awareness gets, bigger and bigger, and you're understanding more, you're seeing things for what they are. And I think there's a huge shift happening. And at the same time, people are like, well, the whole world is going to wake up at the same. I mean, that's just not realistic, because we live in a duality, or earth is a duality, and darkness is just as important as light. And I think people get really upset when I say that, or to the 10 people I've said that to in my life. But it's just as important, because without the destruction, without the darkness, people would not evolve, people would not change, people would not grow. So I think kind of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And oftentimes I play the dual advocate for the sake of the podcast so that we have
Right.
a
Well, right.
conversation to
Yeah.
be
I
able to
mean,
have.
I prefer to feel good, obviously. Everyone, I prefer to be, love and light, but I'm also just not afraid of the darkness either, and I think it's
Yeah,
just as valid.
I think that's the huge shift in coming into spiritual awareness. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I embracing the shadow is such a huge part of being able to work with the light. Because how could we
Absolutely.
help people through struggle if we didn't experience struggle ourselves? Or how could we see the systems that need to be healed if we didn't see them at their worst?
100%. Yes. Yes.
So I really enjoyed chatting with you today. I just
Me
want to give you
too.
some space to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share to feel more complete about our time together.
I know. I just really appreciate you letting me share what I've shared. I was I hope I made sense. I sometimes just ramble, so I hope it was clear. And I don't know where this is going to go for me, but I would love to continue helping in any way. So I've always been the one to not really plan my life. I like a rough outline, so I just like to do what brings me joy. And so I'm going to continue following that joy wherever that takes me. But I'm so appreciative of you giving me this space and this container. I feel like I've gotten like a 1,000 pound weights off my shoulders. So thank you.
Super grateful for you. Thank you for coming out of the spiritual closet with our community at
Yes.
IANDS. I'm so excited for you. I know that big things are in store. And I just want to
Thank
thank
you.
you again. And we'll sign off and see you next time.
Thank you, Patty.